Shannon Bream.
I'm Tom Shalhoub.
I'm Maria Bartiromo, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, March 13th, 2020. I'm Lisa Brady. No matter what else is happening, the election clock keeps ticking. And for Democrats, it means less and less time to unify behind a nominee. But one thing hasn't changed.
Eye on the prize. Electability has been the most important issue to 60% plus of the Democratic electorate from day one.
I'm Carly Shimkus. The controversial thriller The Hunt is now in theaters. It was described as an anti-conservative slasher film. The screenwriter explains how everyone got the movie wrong.
While every American, independent of what side of the aisle you stand on, or you don't want to stand in the aisle at all, they all acknowledge that these are divided times, but nobody wants them to be divided.
And I'm Charlie Kirk, and I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Less than 8 months from now, voters across America will be at the polls, choosing a president. But first, Democrats have to finish choosing a challenger.
Whoever it is, I hope they make their choice soon. I thought it was going to be, everybody thought it was going to be Bernie.
President Trump keeps suggesting the nomination's being stolen from Senator Bernie Sanders after an epic comeback by former Vice President Joe Biden, who is reaching out to Sanders supporters.
I believe we're in an incredible moment in American history, a phenomenal opportunity to deliver a bold, progressive vision to the American people.
But how did Bernie Sanders get to this point, even though his crowds appear just as enthusiastic about his democratic socialist revolution as they were 4 years ago?
The longer Bernie has been on the stage, the more it's been clarified what his views are and how out of the mainstream they are and how much of a vulnerability they might be in a general election.
Karl Rove is a Republican strategist and Fox News contributor.
I go back to his comments defending Fidel Castro a couple weeks ago. That was the week before South Carolina, and I think it helped sort of cause a lot of people to say, you know what, he really is way out there. And a man who can't bring himself to denounce Fidel Castro and excuses him by saying he had a literacy program is not a guy I feel comfortable with. And you couple that with the South Carolina win, which was largely due to Clyburn's endorsement and the strong support that Biden had in the African-American community, and that had a lethal combination going into Super Tuesday of causing a lot of people to say, you know what, I've now become convinced that Bernie would be a disaster. I've seen a lot of TV ads, but haven't become convinced that Bloomberg is the alternative, and Mayor Pete and Amy don't seem to have the gravitas necessary to be president. I guess I'm going with Biden. Sometimes in politics, it's better to be lucky than good, and Biden was very lucky. I've never seen 72 hours like we saw from the end of the South Carolina primary through the end of Super Tuesday.
Hasn't Sanders at least succeeded, though, in pushing the party to embrace some of his progressive ideas? Because some things from 4 years ago are suddenly being, talked about a lot more now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, his goal is to transform the Democratic Party and then transform the country. He's a revolutionary, and he wants to commit the Democratic Party to a socialist agenda, which is why I think he's going to stay in. He understands he's not a conventional politician. He's not trying to curry favor. He's not these are not his friends. This is not get along, go along. I owe these people something. It is I fought them every step of the way from the time that I ran for mayor, Congress, governor, U.S. senator. I've always had to fight a Democrat in order to get elected, and I'm only using my candidacy as a way to transform the Democratic Party and transform the country. So, yeah, I think he's been very successful.
I thought it was interesting, though, that Bernie Sanders, in those first public remarks after his heavy losses Tuesday, essentially offered what almost sounded like a cheat sheet for Joe Biden for an upcoming debate, saying, yes, I'm going to ask you about this and this and this. And he went into fairly great detail.
Joe, what are you going to do to end the absurdity of the United States of America being the only major country on earth where health care is not a human right?
Could that also have been a way to say to Biden, here's what you need to address for my supporters to be able to vote for you if it comes to that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, he drew more attention to the debate by doing that. He made clear the big differences potentially between the two of them, and he put himself in a position where if Biden agreed with him, it looked like Biden was making a concession. All of those strengthened Bernie. They may not strengthen him in the ability to win delegates, but they strengthen his influence over the party. In the he can show up in July and say, well, in the debate in Arizona, you promised this, you promised that. Let's write it into the platform, and thereby bind the Democratic Party to more of his views.
At this point, the math to win the nomination is not on Sanders' side. Jessica Tarlov is a Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor.
When you look at the states that are in play, Bernie's best shot of making some headway was last Tuesday and the mini Super Tuesday. He should have picked up Washington. He should have picked up Idaho. But if you're looking at Florida and Georgia and Arizona, these are states where Biden has a huge lead, and it just continues to grow.
Is there any kind of reasoning that makes sense for the Sanders campaign from the standpoint of, look, the longer we stay in, however, the more we can encourage the party to embrace our progressive ideas and maybe get it into the platform come convention time?
Well, that's a theory of the case that they had in 2016, and they accomplished a lot of it. I mean, they pushed the party to the left, certainly on healthcare was probably their biggest achievement, on issues like in the Middle East. Actually, they were able to push the party to the left, kind of away from, I would say, not like a unilaterally pro-Israel stance, but certainly with more concessions for how we were going to handle the two-state solution. So, yeah, that's an argument to make, though I would say that Bernie Sanders' impact has already been felt in the way that people ran this race, and in how someone like Elizabeth Warren crafted their entire campaign. So I'm not sure actually how much he's going to accomplish that way. I just think that timing-wise, it was too early for his energized base, which is smaller than he said it was. And we have to keep that in mind. He did not deliver the record turnout that he had promised us. But if it looks like he is just giving up before we at least get through the March 17th primaries, I think that he would be facing a lot more anger from his base than he wants to take on. So I think it's less of a negotiation and more of a just follow through until the delegate math is so clear that it's an impossibility, and then to make the case to his supporters that we have to unify to beat Trump in November.
Is it in the voters' hands? And I mean that from the standpoint of, do the Democratic voters at this point have the ability to get behind Biden enough to end this primary fight earlier than it ended 4 years ago? I
think so. I mean, there are two key factors that I'm paying attention to that we've seen. So turnout is bonkers. I mean, it is just in some places, like in Virginia, that it doubled is absurd, right? So that's going on. And that's something that Biden talked about, where he said, I can turn out people that you are not thinking of. Everyone made fun of him for saying we should be doing outreach to conservative Democrats, independents who are right-leaning, and moderate Republicans. There are a lot of Romney Republicans sitting around that are horrified at what's going on right now, and we can reach them. So that's one element. The other element is how much of 2016 was not about Bernie Sanders, but about how much people hated Hillary Clinton. And I don't know if you've had a chance to watch the Hulu documentary yet about her, but it's very clear from the conversations that they're having that they were aware of the fact that there was an unprecedented smear campaign against her for decades, right? That goes back, obviously, to Whitewater. I mean, her whole, basically since she met Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton has been lampooned. And Sanders won a lot of primaries in 2016, not because of him, but because people weren't enamored with Hillary. So they just didn't show up for it. Biden doesn't have that problem. People are more comfortable with him. I think it matters that he's a dude, and that she was obviously not a dude, and sexism is a factor in our elections.
And I guess for Democrats, it's probably also not even a bad thing if the vote for Biden isn't so much against Bernie Sanders, but against President Trump.
Exactly. That's how every Democratic vote, I believe, in the general election will be cast. I mean, Biden has an enthusiastic African-American base, which people who were dismissing it when the numbers got a little wonky was very upsetting to me, because it was quite clear that this was the only person in the race that our most reliable voting bloc felt connected to and had known for decades and decades and decades. And obviously Jim Clyburn really swung it over the edge when he came out with that very moving endorsement of him. But eye on the prize. Electability has been the most important issue to 60% plus of the Democratic electorate from day one. They see Trump as an existential threat to the nation. And I mean, who knows, knock on wood, that COVID-19 is under control at some point soon. But I don't think it's going to be. And the economy now is completely wonky. That was what Trump could run on, and I thought that he would win on. It looks a lot more in doubt that you're going to be able to successfully run on an economy that looks like this.
And if Biden is the nominee, Karl Rove acknowledges he won't be as easy a target for the president as Bernie Sanders.
They've got to make sure that people understand how the steps that he's taken to the left. It's not going to be just enough to attach a label to him, Sleepy Joe or whatever, but it's going to have to be, they're going to have to go after his agenda and what he has said. And for example, saying that you're going to ban drilling on federal lands and federal waters. I mean, that's going to hurt them in places like Texas and Louisiana, which the Democrats may have thrown away, but it's also going to hurt them in places like New Mexico and Colorado, which are up for grabs, perhaps, in this environment, if the case can be made. But free health care for illegal aliens, that's going to be unpopular in a lot of places.
You were with President Bush during 9/11. In terms of responding to a crisis, how do you handle it? What do you do, since we're in the midst of this coronavirus situation now?
First of all, the president has to be surrounded by strong people who are capable of helping him make the right decisions. That is to say, identify decisions that have to be made and give the president the best arguments on both sides of the case and let him make the call. The president needs to have somebody who is designated to run the day-to-day of the process, to make sure that the entire government is moving as one. I thought it was a very smart move to provide, to pick Vice President Mike Pence at that and allow him to provide that kind of leadership. I thought very important. The president has an important role in making decisions, but there's got to be somebody who's paying attention to the nitty-gritty and helping identify the issues that need to be fully staffed out and taken to the president for his decision. The president has a big microphone, a big megaphone to talk to the American people. He used it on the ban of travel of European visitors. There are going to be other moments like that, which means he needs a good speechwriting staff, and the communication shop needs to be able to explain that policy, fill in the detail. And third of all, the president needs to, in situations like this, to defer to the experts.
If campaigning, at least in the short term, becomes less and less personal, if they have to have less interaction on the trail, holding virtual events, for instance, how much could that impact the outcome? Because the president's known for his big rallies. Joe Biden, for instance, is known as being a hugger, not just a handshaker. Could this really impact the race?
Yes, but realize this. We do have just under 8 months until the election, but there's plenty of time for rallies. I mean, the president is the president, and I think George W. Bush's first event, I mean, we might have had 1 or 2 events in the spring of 2004, but we were really not active in sort of campaign mode until June. So he's got plenty of time as the incumbent. The guy who's going to be sort of crimped for this right now is Biden, because it's going to be things like debates and it's going to be things like election outcomes. But in between, it's going to be hard for him to do things that sort of grab people's attention when we're all talking about the coronavirus.
Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Karl Rove, thanks so much for your time.
You bet. Thank you.
This is Charlie Kirk with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Last summer, a violent movie called The Hunt sparked widespread political backlash. It slashed its way onto the scene in July, and while no one had seen it yet, the trailer and a shocking Hollywood Reporter piece about it led folks to believe it's about rich liberals hunting down and killing Trump supporters for fun.
Every year, a bunch of elites kidnap normal folk like us. Where'd they get you from?
Wyoming, Mississippi,
Orlando. And hunt us for sport.
The outrage and headlines were instant. Many felt the movie was twisted and dangerous. Then in August, a real-life horror took place.
All of a sudden, it just pop, pop, pop. And it just took me a second or two to realize what was happening.
2 mass shootings, one in Dayton, Ohio, the other in El Paso, Texas. A few days later, the president tweeted that the movie was created in order to inflame and cause chaos. Universal Pictures responded by canceling its September release date indefinitely. 6 months later, it was announced that it would hit theaters after all, and you can see it now. The film's new tagline, the most talked about movie of the year, is one no one has seen yet. So is this movie really a gory political horror about eliminating MAGA supporters?
It was less about wanting to play off or exploit the political division in the country and more just sort of reflect a certain degree of absurdity about it.
Damon Lindelof co-wrote the film. He also co-created Lost and HBO's The Leftovers. He says the movie was actually created to mock the nation's political divide and help bring people back together.
I will say this, and maybe I'm just too glass half full or too optimistic, but I do think that while every American, independent of what side of the aisle you stand on, or you don't want to stand in the aisle at all, they all acknowledge that these are divided times, but nobody wants them to be divided. And so I think that the idea of the movie was to do our intention at least was to present a very absurdist extreme, to say this is not where we are, but it's where we're headed. And it's an opportunity to maybe laugh at ourselves a bit. That's the hardest thing for me to do as a storyteller, is to kind of, make fun of myself and the bubble that I'm in. And the movie is sort of an expression of that.
Yeah. You sort of say that this movie is a cautionary tale. Like, how ridiculous is it that people are actually hurting people because of their political disagreements? But some people saw the trailer last year and thought that the movie was dangerous. And I think a lot of people were upset because of the simple fact that it's about a certain political party, the conservative political party, getting murdered because of their beliefs. What is your response to that criticism?
I think it's a legitimate criticism, and I completely understand why that was the takeaway from the trailer. My hope is that if people choose to go see the movie, they'll understand that that's not really what it's about. And I think it's more about, it's not about they're being murdered for their political beliefs. They're being murdered for assumptions about what their political beliefs are. One of the things about the movie is nobody tries to engage anyone else in an actual conversation or a spirited debate of ideas. They just sort of leap right to this sort of extreme viewpoint. And I think that this idea that you look at someone and based on the state that they live in or the way that they talk or the way that they dress or the job that they have, you make all these automatic assumptions about, something very personal and in many ways more complicated than just saying, I am a conservative or I am a liberal. There's a lot of nuance in people's political beliefs. Yeah. But at the end of the day, even people that we love in our own family may not share our political beliefs. But the solution is not to exact violence upon them.
Yeah, hate grows when you don't even try to talk to the other side or somebody different. And I think that this movie sort of captures that feeling very well. Back in August, President Trump posted a tweet criticizing the movie, saying it was created to inflame and cause chaos. Obviously, you disagree with that perspective. But what was it like to see the president tweet something negative about the movie? And what would you tell him about what you've created and why he was wrong?
It was obviously a very surreal experience and not something that I ever imagined would happen to me in my lifetime for the President of the United States to be aware of the movie, let alone tweet about it. And I guess my feeling at the time that it happened was it was sort of following this entire week after these horrific shootings in El Paso and Dayton, which I think the entire country was collectively reeling about. And I think that the movie got caught up in that swirl, understandably, because of the idea that it was a violent movie and had sort of political undertones. And I guess all I would say is that I'm relieved that the conversation is now shifting into what the movie is versus what people thought the movie was. And all I can say is, for anyone who knows me or my co-writer Nick or the director Craig or even Jason Blum, who obviously has made a lot of these kind of crazy horror movies and he's been nominated for Oscars and all sorts of things, is nobody's intention was to make something dangerous. The last thing that this country needs is a movie that is making us feel yucky or inciting some level of violence. I think that the purpose of the movie was to show an extreme and actually get us to take a step back away from the edge of the cliff versus jumping over it.
I was lucky enough to be able to see the movie in advance, and I think that you did a very good job of sort of creating these ridiculous stereotypes about both liberals and conservatives. But one of my takeaways was I sort of think that the movie comes down harder on the liberal characters than it does conservatives. Have you heard that before?
That's a really interesting perspective, and I haven't heard it phrased quite that way. I will say, my friends in the bubble with me who have seen the movie are sort of like, ooh, that stings a little. Was that supposed to sting? Mm-hmm. And I think like what I would say is that for me, I'm much more comfortable making fun of myself than I am making fun of others. And so the world that I travel in, the people that I know, it's much easier to write a satire about them. And so I think that if the movie is, we were searching for people to walk out of it feeling like it was as balanced as humanly possible. But given my own, sort of like affiliation, predisposition, again, I don't want to oversimplify it by saying this is what I am. But if I'm a progressive, I'm much more comfortable taking shots at myself than I am at anyone else.
Yeah, well, the stereotypes are, they're all funny. And if you can't laugh at yourself, then who can you laugh at? Are you nervous that this movie won't be well received by conservatives, liberals, or people who maybe just don't like violence?
If the conversation around the movie just basically moves into a space of is it good or is it bad?
Right.
Did I like it or is it funny? Is it not funny? That will be a huge relief to me.
Yeah.
For the people who've seen the movie, no one has said to me, oh, I think this movie is dangerous. Mm-hmm. In fact, if the most primary negative reaction that I've gotten so far is that some people were expecting it to be really controversial and provocative.
Yeah.
And they seem a little bit disappointed when they see that it's just a fun kind of B movie where, people are running around and shooting at each other. And I understand that if you describe the movie to people, it feels like it's provocative, but I think everyone who's actually seen it is kind of like, oh, it was a bit of much ado about nothing.
Yeah, the satire is definitely more on full display in the movie than it was in the original trailer. And after I saw it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So that bodes well for I think what you want people to take out of the movie. But you bring up an interesting point about, violence in movies and all that. And when The Joker came out, a lot of people said that it could inspire real world violence. Do you think that filmmakers and screenwriters have a responsibility to take that into consideration?
Absolutely. You have to have that conversation. I mean, when you say take it into consideration, 100%. And then the question just becomes, do you proceed anyway? My belief, whether it's right or wrong, is I just have a tremendous amount of faith in the audience. I think you can't treat the American audience or the worldwide audience like they're children. Yeah. People make a choice as to whether or not they want to go see a movie. If you see a trailer for Joker and it looks violent and upsetting for you, then you shouldn't go see the Joker. And people can sort of self-select. We're not forcing anybody to watch any of this stuff. But I think that it is irresponsible to just make something that is exploitative or it's purposely divisive or it's glorifying, violent themes and ideas. Like you have to have the conversation of what am I trying to say here? Like, is there a way that I could be misunderstood?
What do you hope people walk away with after they've seen this movie?
If anything, we wanted to reflect the absurdity of, as you said, stereotypes. If there's any message from the movie, it is the old standby of don't judge a book by its cover. Don't make judgments about someone just based on how they look or how they talk, or where they're from. I think that people are much more complicated than that. And look, we love our families, but this idea of sort of like selecting a team and being on that team and that kind of gets you nowhere. And we'd much rather sit at the Thanksgiving table and have a spirited conversation than not go to the Thanksgiving table at all.
Yeah, so well said, and something this country definitely needs to remember and reflect on at a time like this. Well, this movie is unabashedly violent. There are a lot of creative murders, and considering you are the co-writer, how did you come up with them? What part of your brain did you tap into? And should we be concerned about you?
Look, I think that that most children, and certainly most of the young boys that I was hanging out with when I was 6 and 7 years old, found inventive ways to dismember our action figures. We would tie firecrackers to them. We would rip them in half. We would just, drop them in, to pits of mud, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that, it sort of starts there. And obviously, these are people in a movie, but I think that Nick and I, and certainly Craig, wanted to go as over the top as humanly possible in depicting this violence, and the idea that it's almost so absurd and silly when someone is basically, falling into a pit full of sharp spikes and their entire body has been torn in half.
Yeah.
And they're still talking and talking about birthday cake, that hopefully the audience is like, okay, we are not meant to take this too serious.
Yeah. Well, I will never look at a high-heeled shoe the same way. And trust me, I own a lot of them.
Those things are dangerous.
They are. You never
Careful
know.
with high-heeled shoes.
You could definitely twist
I hear
an
they're very
ankle.
uncomfortable, too.
Yeah. Damon, thank you so much for talking to me and
I really
taking the
appreciate
time.
your time.
We appreciate it. Good luck
Thanks
with the
for
movie.
your open-mindedness.
If you are enjoying the Fox News Rundown, you can listen every day by going to foxnewspodcasts.com and subscribing. There you'll also find exclusive podcasts hosted by some of your favorite Fox News personalities, including Dana Perino, Brett Baer, Martha McCallum, and Greg Gutfeld. Head over to foxnewspodcasts.com to listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
And now, some good news with Tanya J. Powers.
Technology is helping Bruce the goose live his best life. 13-year-old Bruce is a domestic Chinese goose who was injured by a raccoon and almost lost his life. It's a feisty one.
Has a lot of attitude and opinions, but he loves people.
Susan Curtis is the director of the nonprofit Sandy's Haven, which is a sanctuary for wildlife and farm animals. She says the fight left Bruce with no bill, which is bad.
Their mouth will dry out, their tongue gets very dry and uncomfortable. They can't eat as well, they can't drink, they can't take care of themselves, they can't defend themselves.
So they 3D printed him a new one. Sanctuary manager Jody Curtis says they tried several prototypes before they found a bill that worked.
We have used a glue it's used in dentistry for placing crowns in place.
Carmen Ramirez was part of the team that made the bill.
At first, he shook his head, like rejecting it, but then he started moving his mouth up and down, like starting to use the beak, and it was really cool.
Jody says it can also make a difference not just for Bruce, but to others as well.
One thing we really enjoy is taking these animals into places like assisted living or hospitals, things like that, where people can see how their lives are turning out and the pleasure that they can bring, and it just helps their lives immensely.
Bruce has a new lease on life and is expected to live 2 or 3 more years. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Charlie Kirk. What's on your mind?
No man has completely controlled American politics the way President Donald J. Trump has. Not Reagan, not Roosevelt, not even Lincoln. No national news story is complete without including his most recent comments. No policy is worth discussing unless we know what Trump has to say about it. The Democrats don't seem to know what they stand for unless it's socialism or the opposite of whatever Trump says. Many Republican office holders aren't much better. Far too many have spent so much time away from their constituents, they don't know they're on the wrong side of an issue until they hear Trump speak. Their constant grasping at illogical policies betrays an underlying truth about President Trump that none of his critics on either side of the aisle want to admit. He is not simply shooting from the hip or governing on a whim. They are. He has a clearly defined framework and basis for his decisions upon that system. They are the ones who have no definable playbook to counter his moves that often seem 2 steps ahead. If you're a Trump supporter, what I'm about to lay out should be a clear statement of what you've known all along, but maybe struggled to put into words. First, he believes in American sovereignty. He will always side with American citizens over those from other countries. Second, he will always stand up for everyday working Americans over the, quote, elites, those who love their families and their God, those who are doing things the right way, those who shower before and after work. No matter how deranged his detractors get, this is a simple moral stance I am proud to get behind. We were told that nothing could be done to reverse the devastating toll the last few decades have taken on American workers. We were told we could never protect the needs of the men and women punching the clock in middle America against the overwhelming forces of globalization. Trump rejected this conventional wisdom, pushed by the ruling class in Washington. He defied the, quote, experts and was adamant that we could turn things around. He was right. This brand of positive conservative populism is not bigoted or mean-spirited. It's common sense. But the left has no way to comprehend the MAGA moment we're in because they're no longer grateful to live in America. They don't want to make it great again. They want to, quote, fundamentally transform it. I write in my new book, The MAGA Doctrine, that unlike the left, the president deeply loves America and holds dear the values that made this the greatest country in the history of the world. He sided with those who's been chewed up by a government prone to political correctness, high taxes, the enrichment of our trading partners at our expense, and appeasement of our greatest geopolitical foes like Iran and China. Many of these individuals are tired of seeing the government sympathize with non-Americans over them. They're tired of the Democrats saying there's no way to, quote, wave a magic wand to restore our economic might. Sometimes the left insults the president by saying he's playing checkers, not chess. The irony is that he keeps beating all of his adversaries at whatever game they want to play. If we can properly understand the lessons he's taught us, we can make sure that the Trump moment becomes the Trump movement, one that helps conservatives win for generations to come. I'm Charlie Kirk, author of the book MAGA Doctrine, The Only Ideas That Will Win the Future, now available.
You have been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to Fox News Radio's hourly newscast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, visit foxnews.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust, and click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.